Well, good morning. I'm sitting here waiting for 9 o'clock to get here, and I just said, let's just get started. Man, we're a little early, but that's okay. I'd rather be early than late. Well, good Thursday morning to you. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. And don't know what part of the country you may be watching from or joining us from. Maybe another part of the world this morning. We have quite a few international viewers. Pakistan, Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, and other places, Canada. So we have quite a few international viewers, but we welcome you wherever you're from. So I hope you are having a good morning. I'm doing pretty good this morning. I had a pretty good morning. Got up, slept pretty good last night, and went to church, had a good service at church. Had Brother McCumbee preach last night, a missionary friend of mine. Brother Mike McCumbee, his daughter and son-in-law goes to our church. And I met Brother McCumbee when I was pastoring back before I got cancer. I was pastoring in Piney Flats over at a Pilgrim Baptist. Good morning, Miss Leah. Good to see you this morning. When I was pastoring over at Piney Flats there at Pilgrim Baptist, and when I found out I had cancer and resigned from pastoring, Brother McCumbee and his wife had visited one Sunday. Never met them. They just walked into the church visiting, introduced themselves as missionaries with BIMI. They'd been over in Albania for, I think, 20-something years, 30 years. They'd been with the mission board since 1993. I think they'd been missionaries, and they worked with BIMI quite a while. And they were just visiting churches. They were back from the field, and they were working with BIMI now in the States. And so we became good friends then, and he's had cancer as well, and he's still going through some treatments. And so I get to see him every now and then. He comes to our church to be with his daughter. And last night our preacher was in Ohio at Dr. Geiler's funeral yesterday morning, and they couldn't get back last night, so he and his wife, I think, stayed up. They were there for the viewing Tuesday and the funeral yesterday, and so he called Brother McCumbee to preach. He's preached there quite a few times. I think we support him. I'm almost certain we do. And so he preached last night, did a great job, preached on the light. You're the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and talked about the light. And did a good job. Got to see him and his wife, and got to spend a little time with them last night. So had a good night. So it was good. Had a good church service, and it's always good to be in church. I've missed so much in the last few months. It's always good every time I get to go. And I'm getting where I'm a little stronger, able to walk. I ain't using a cane anymore. Able to walk without my cane, and so got a fairly busy day today. I'll be working, of course, on my Bible Institute stuff. I'm trying to get all my classes done. I got 53 classes I'm working on, and I've got 20 of them finished with all the notes, the syllabus, everything, student notes. Hello, Brother Gilbert, good to see you this morning. Hey, Miss Amber, good to see you. I've got 53 classes that I've set up to get all the stuff ready. So 20 of them are finished with the syllabus, which tells what the requirements are for the class and the schedule for all 12 weeks. And then I've got the notes for the students and the instructor's notes for me. So I finished the 20th one last night about 11 o'clock. My wife was ready to go to bed. She had gotten ready, and she come in there in the living room. Hey, Brother Greg. And I was sitting there. I said, give me just 1 second to finish downloading this one thing. Hey, Brother Gary. And so I've got 20 of them done, so I got 33 more to go to cover the 53 classes that we're going to cover as of now. There'll be more added. I'm going to come up with more, but I can't remember all of them. I've done Revelation. I've got Hebrews. I've got Romans. I've got the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible. I've got the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I've got how to study the Bible. I've got like I say, hermeneutics. I've got hermeneutics 1. I got to do 2 today, the second part. And then I've got, I can't remember all the ones I've got done. Quite a few. Prayer. I've got the one done on prayer. So I've got 20 of them done. So I got 33 more to go. So it's a long process. I've got enough now with 20 that I can start teaching. So probably in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to start recording the classes, and with 20 of them I could get listed and get the college up and running, because it'll take me about another 2 or 3 weeks to get the other 33 notes finished, and all of the syllabus. The syllabuses are done. I've got the syllabuses done for 40-something, which is the schedule for the class, and so I just got to prepare the notes, and I can do those pretty quick because I have a lot of the notes already done, and then I've got a lot of the notes already in skeleton form. I just have to put the meat on the bones. And so most of what the students will get will be just bullet points of stuff that I'll cover when I'm teaching. So anyway, it's a lot of work. And I'm putting in 10, 12 hours a day right now. My little fingers. As a matter of fact, I got to hurting in my neck 2 days ago, day before yesterday. I got hurting real bad right there, and I couldn't figure out what. And I'm sitting here holding my phone like this while I'm typing. And because I've got everything on my phone, I put everything on my phone so I can stay downstairs. I've got my laptop here, but I don't like to drag my laptop downstairs, and it runs out of juice real quick. I can keep it plugged up. It's just a lot of work. So I get everything on my phone, on my notepad on my phone, and then I put it in a PDF file. Then I can transfer it to my laptop. So I'm sitting there doing this, and I'm doing all this stuff and doing all this typing, and I really figured out what was going on. I was this hand up all the time, was stretching on that muscle there. And so I said, man, if it's not one thing, it's another. Just that movement, doing the same thing for hours and hours, days and days. And I've been doing this ever since I've been out sick. I've been typing. I've been working on 3 books, really 10 books. I've got 10 books in the makings, 3 almost done. And then now doing 53 Bible college classes. Had a guy at church last night. Matter of fact, Brother McCumbee, son-in-law, he said, when do y'all ever rest? I said, well, we go to bed about 11. And I just said, by the time we get through praying, it's usually 11:15, 11:20 before we turn the light out. And I said, we get up about 6 every morning, 6:15. And I said, then I get ready, and then I study until 9 o'clock. Well, I studied about 8:30. And then to do a podcast at 9. And then after that, I go downstairs, unless I got something else to do. I start on my notes and my stuff for Bible college and my books. So I'm studying and writing every day. So I said, I put in 10, 12 hours a day, but it's at home. So anyway, yeah, I probably should use my laptop more, but honestly, when I lost my finger, when I cut my finger off years ago, it messed up I can type, and I've had to compensate for that. But I can do it quicker on my phone. And I've got the laptop. My phone has got a notepad. I wouldn't even tell you the hundreds of thousands of words that are on my notepad. I've got everything on that notepad. And the notepad automatically, I hit the bottom, I hit the print, and I can make it a PDF file and save it in a PDF file and transfer it straight to my publisher, transfer it straight to my laptop. The good thing about being on my phone, the reason I do that, is because when I get something done, I run it through AI. And I asked it a bunch of specific questions. It checks my grammar. It checks the pattern of how it's used to my writing now. And it goes with the pattern and see if I'm staying with the subject, if I'm dealing with it the way I intended. And so AI is like an editor for me. It helps me edit. I read it and edit it myself. I catch spelling and grammar, and then I run it through AI, and it picks out the automatic things. And then the program I've got in my phone will show me misspellings and grammatical errors automatically underlined in different colors. So I can do all that. Once I get that 99% done, I just save it in a PDF file, then I send it to my publisher, then they do the editing, which is very little, so it doesn't cost me as much to get books edited anymore. And so I'm saving quite a few $100, because a big book like my autobiography professionally would cost thousands of dollars to get it edited. And so now my editor's worked out a deal with me perpetually, forever until the Lord calls me home, a certain amount for every book. And my editing now is getting better, that I can get my books within 95 to 98% done. Maybe some grammar, a few things I miss, and then my wife reads it. She catches things. She tells me on page so-and-so, you got this, and I correct it. So between she and myself, we get it pretty well edited where it's ready to go to print within one edit of AI or one edit of a human being. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But good to see everybody's coming online. Hey, Miss Amy. Hey, Brother Elliot. Let's listen to a song by 11th Hour. This is one of my favorite songs they've ever done. It's called I'd Like to Meet the Preacher. And this is a real song. I love it. One of my favorites. I like to meet the preacher that led the preacher that led me to the Lord. Oh, it's so good. Enjoy. 11th Hour. Thank God for preachers.
The sinner to come. There came a morning, he said, someone here's running, and I knew that I was the one. And though it's been years since I made Jesus mine, if for all
Good morning, Brother John.
moment I could go
Back in time.
I'd like to
Meet the preacher.
pray
For the preacher. Pray for me down on. I like to meet the preacher that prayed for the preacher that prayed for me down on my knees. Woo!
reached out again to the hand that reached out to me.
I knew the preacher that led my preacher that led me to the Lord. Bud Rogers led my preacher to the Lord, and I've been with Bud Rogers many times. He's in heaven now.
I would thank him for preaching about sin and the Savior and the blood that forever
Love you, Brother Elliot.
atones.
Good to see you. Hey, Miss Marie, good to see you this morning.
I thank
Marie
him
Renner.
for truth and not a watered down gospel. It's the rock that I'm standing on.
Oh, I love this.
Oh, we all have someone who showed us the
Do you remember who led you to the Lord?
ragged need a soldier in the army of faith. I'd
Like to meet the preacher who prayed for the preacher who prayed for me down on my. Oh, I love it.
I'd like to shake the hand that reached out again to the hand that reached out to me.
Come on now, sing it now.
I'd like to meet
The preacher.
pray for the preacher. Pray with me down on my knees.
Wow.
I'd like to shake the hand that reached out again.
Oh, thank God for the man of God that led me to the Lord.
Reached out to me. Oh, I'd like to shake the hand that reached out to the hand that reached out to me. Oh, yes, he reached out. Yes, he reached out to me.
Well, that's the 11th hour singers. Some of my favorite singers today. I'm telling you, those kids can sing. Two girls and a guy, and the one that leads the group in the middle, she's the one that's singing the lead there. You understand what she's saying? She said, I'd like to meet the preacher who prayed for the preacher that prayed for me down on my knees. Bobby Ratz was the preacher that was preaching when I got saved. And the preacher that led him to the Lord was Bud Rogers down at West Park, down in North Carolina. And I was friends with Brother Bud Rogers and his son. His son's still living, I believe, about my age. But I knew Bud Rogers. Preacher Bud Rogers came to our church and preached quite often when I was a boy. Hey, Miss Darlene. So I knew the preacher that prayed for the preacher that prayed for me down on my knees. Hey, Brother Snyder, Brother Brian, good to see you. What a great truth. Thank God for preachers. Do you remember the preacher that was responsible for bringing you to the Lord? Do you know who brought him to the Lord? I mean, you go back in the story, and I don't have it all with me right now. I can't remember it all. But the story of Billy Graham. You ought to trace back the story of Billy Graham and see who was responsible all the way back. Just a simple, unknown man was the man that was responsible for leading the preacher that led the preacher that led the preacher that led the preacher. Billy Graham got saved at a tent meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'll think of the man's name in just a minute. But anyway, a great preacher. And but the man that led him to the Lord, and the man that led him to the Lord. And that's what the song's about shaking the hand of the man that shook the hand of the man that brought me to the Lord. And so I thank God for all the men involved in my life. The man that was preaching when I got saved was the Bobby Ratz. And then when my wife and I got married, we joined Landis Baptist Church. And Brother Richard Horn became the pastor that grounded me in my faith. I had never grown much when I got saved. I didn't hear much doctrine, My preacher was a good man, but he was uneducated and not student of the word like many are. And I'm not saying he was shallow, but he just preached real simple stuff. And I never understood. And I was confused in my doctrine. I was in a church that was a missionary Baptist, but their doctrine was a little confused because of the people that some of the men hung around. So I was really confused on a lot of things. But when my wife and I got saved, we got in Landis Baptist Church, and Brother Horn he began to mentor me, and I began to work with young folks. And he started on Wednesday night. I remember when he did. He said, I'm going to start a new series on Wednesday night called Bible Doctrine. And he used Evans' book on the great doctrines of the Bible. That was a textbook when I was in Bible college. But he used that on Wednesday night, went through every doctrine, the major doctrines, doctrine of God, theology, the doctrine of Christ, Christology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, pneumatology, the doctrine of the Bible, bibliology, the doctrine of man, anthropology, the doctrine of sin, harmoniology, all the way through the doctrine of Satan. He went through every major doctrine on Wednesday night. I couldn't hardly wait to get to church on Wednesday nights because he was teaching Bible doctrine. I never heard this stuff. And he took us through for a year through all the major Bible doctrines, and I was so excited. Then when I started Bible college, the first year I was in Bible college, I had a professor. I was in his class, and it was Biblical Interpretation 1 and 2. It was a whole year. Bib Interp is what we call Bib Interp 1, Bib Interp 2. And he taught me more that first year and rehearsed everything in my mind that my pastor had taught me in Bible doctrine. And those first couple of years of Bible college, I was so grounded in the Word, I could go through every book of the New Testament, all of Paul's writings, give you chapter content and Bible interpretation. And we took hermeneutics. I understood how to interpret the Bible, all the principles. Those things grounded me in the faith, and so I'm thankful for the men that led me to the Lord. I'm thankful for that, and it's made an impact on my life forever. Well, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning on this Thursday. Hope you're well. Hope you're having a good morning wherever you are. This is the Preacher's Podcast. I'm Brother David Harrison, and we are in the book of Numbers this morning. We stopped yesterday. We were in Numbers 14, and we stopped about verse 23. So we're going to pick up around verse 20. Verse 21. We'll start reading verse 21, and we'll go to the end of the chapter. We'll read it all, and then we'll come back and finish commenting. But in verse number 21 of chapter number 14, the Bible says, and the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. Moses has interceded for the crowd that had murmured and had turned against the spies that brought back the bad report, the evil report. And so God's about to kill him, and Moses intercedes, and God says, I'm going to spare them. But the ones that are in unbelief, that are 20 and over, are not going to possess the land. Their children will, but they will not possess the land, all but Caleb and Joshua. And the rest of them under 20 are going to come. Hey, Miss Linda, good to see you on here, sis. I hope you're feeling better. I know you had chemo yesterday, or you were supposed to. I hope you're okay. I know the day after chemo is not fun. So I hope you're doing better than most. I hope you're resting. I hope you're drinking plenty of fluids, and I hope you're staying as strong as you can. We're praying for you daily, sister. I prayed for you last night before I went to bed, and I'll pray for you again today. I'll pray for you after this. So verse 22, because all those men which have seen my glory, my miracles that I did in Egypt in the wilderness, have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely that they shall not see the land. The reason he said tempted me 10 times, 10 of them have turned against the going into the land. So that's why he said they've tempted me 10 times. He's referring to the 10 spies that said we can't go in. This is too much. The sons of Anak make us look like grasshoppers, and everybody's bigger in stature than we are. So he's talking about the 10 men. Verse 23, surely they did not see the land which I swear unto them. He said they didn't see the land. All they saw was the people. They didn't see the land. I promised them the land flowing with milk and honey. And all they saw was the people, and they exaggerated, said all the men are bigger in stature than we are, which wasn't true. And then they said the giants make us look like grasshoppers. That's not true. You got some good news and some that needs some prayers, okay? All right, so be sure and send me a private message. Let me know what it is so I can be sure and pray exactly what you need me to pray. So we pick up in verse 24 where we stopped yesterday. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, Caleb was one of the two that had a positive spirit and had followed me fully, will I bring into the land where he went, and his seed shall possess it. So God has promised Caleb, that mountain you asked for, you're going to get it, and your seed's going to get it. So verse 25. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn you and get you into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. So he's telling them now where to go. They're going to turn and go back to the desert. And the Lord spake unto Moses there and saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation which murmur against me? I've heard the murmurings of the children of Israel which they murmured against me, as they say, truly as I live, the Lord, ye have spoken in my ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you according to the whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me, doubtless you shall not come into the land, concerning which I swear unto you to dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. So everyone 20 and up are going to die in the wilderness, but Joshua and Caleb. Verse 31. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them will I bring in. The ones you're concerned about, their safety, they're going to be the ones that possess the land. You're concerned about your children going in and becoming a prey for the giants. They're going to go in, but you're not. And they'll know what, and they shall know the land which you despise. You've refused it, they're going to know it. 32. As for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in the wilderness. Your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. And the numbers of days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years you shall know my breach of promise. So they spied out the land for 40 days, so 1 year for every day. So they're going to wander for 40 years. So the Lord has told them what's going to happen. Verse 36, the men which Moses sent to the land, 12 spies, God says that he's going to let them die also. Verse 36, made the congregation murmur against them by bringing up a slander. Verse 37, even those men that bring up the evil report upon the land died by the plague before the Lord. So God sent a plague and killed the 10 spies that brought up the evil report. Verse 38, but Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb, which went out to search the land, they lived still. So those 2 men were spared. So it goes all the way to verse 45, and the Amalekites came down, the Canaanites which dwelt in the hill, and smote them and discomfited them even unto Horeb. So they faced a battle in verse 39. The Lord, Moses said, told these sayings of the children of Israel, the people mourned greatly. Verse 40, they rose up early in the morning and got them up in the top of the mountain, saying, lo, we be here, and we'll go up into the place which the Lord had promised, for we have sinned. And Moses said, wherefore now do you transgress the commandment of the Lord? But it shall not prosper. Go not up, for the Lord is not among you, that you be not smitten before your enemy. He said, don't go up. He said, you're running from God. You're trying to find a place to hide after you've disobeyed God. If you go up, you're going to be smitten. Verse 43, for the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and ye shall fall by the sword because you've turned away from the Lord. Therefore the Lord will not be with you. Hey, Miss Donna, but ye presume to go up into the hilltop. Nevertheless, the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses departed not out of the camp. So they wanted to go to the mountain, but Moses says that the ark's not going. So if you go up, you're going by yourself. In verse 45, the Amalekites came down, and the Canaanites which were dwelt in the hill, and smote them and discomfited them even unto Hormah. So they're facing a battle because they're disobeying God, and God is judging them. He's killed the 10 spies that had no faith. He's sent a plague. Now he said everybody 20 and over, except Joshua and Caleb, is going to die in the wilderness, and the children's going to bear their whoredoms for 40 years and wander in circles until the carcasses of their fathers and their grandfathers and grandmothers be destroyed in the wilderness. What a sad epitaph. Israel's Waterloo, all because they did not believe what God had told Abraham, I'm going to give you a land. Instead, they spied it out, which they didn't need to. It wasn't God's idea, it was man's. Deuteronomy 1:20 through 22. They came to God and said, let us send out spies before we cross over. God said, just go possess the land. I already know what it is. I know who's there. I know the walled cities. I'm going to destroy them. All you got to do is this step. Every place your footsteps is going to be yours. I've been taking care of that. But they doubted God, so they spied the land out. God judged them. Now in verse 24, 22 through 24, judgment falls on the children of Israel. The generation that murmured will not enter the promised land. Joshua and Caleb's the only 2 that God singles out. They'll enter the land, but God made good that promise. Caleb got his mountain with his descendants, and Joshua took over the leadership of the nation of Israel. He led them across the Jordan River into the promised land, because Moses is taken to heaven. He's not allowed to go in because of what happens later in the book of Numbers when he strikes the rock again. We'll get to that a little later. Then we come to verses 29 through 32, where God says that their carcasses will fall in the wilderness. The children here, he implied, would go in and possess the land, but the ones that were concerned about their children, they would die. The children were brought safely to the land 40 years later, but all the 20 and up died in the wilderness. So the oldest one that went into the wilderness, say there was a 19-year-old that was alive during the time of their unbelief at Kadesh Barnea. So they wandered for 40 years. So the oldest person that goes into the promised land, beside Caleb and Joshua, would have been probably 59 years old, going on 60. So you've got some that are close to 60, but everybody's under 60 that goes into the promised land 40 years later. Everybody over that age dies in the wilderness. 1.2 million is the estimate. 70 people every day for 40 years are buried. Babies are born and people are dying. It equals out. They end up with about as many people when they go into the land 40 years later as they did when they took the census in chapter 1 of Numbers. So now we come to verse 33 through 35. God tells them they'll wander in the wilderness for 40 years, every year, 1 year for every day that they were in the land spying. They were there 40 days. So God says you'll wander for 40 years. And that was fulfilled. And then in verse 36 and 37, the 10 spies who brought up the evil report that led the rebellion died with a plague. God sent a plague and killed the 10 spies. That's in verses 36 and 37. And then Israel's defeated by the Amalekites and the Canaanites. That's the end of the chapter. In verse 39, they turned from the land, but as they face the wilderness, they're wanting to go to the mountaintop to flee. But Moses says the ark is not going, it's staying in the camp. They're actually now more afraid of the wilderness than they had been afraid of entering the land. They want to run to the mountaintop and try to make amends for what they've done. But instead, God sends in verse 40 through 42, God sends the Amalekites down and the Canaanites, and they send them in disarray. In verse 45, the Bible says they discomfited them. Verse number 40 through 42, Israel has lost this opportunity. They're never going to go up. They presume to go up. This is presumption. Faith is not presumption. They again want to go their way rather than God's, but they cannot have any victory as long as they're not in submission to God's will. Moses says, go if you will, but if the ark is not going, God will not go with you. So they went their way, or started to go their way, doubted God again, and God sent the Amalekites and the Canaanites to discomfit them, which is basically they fought them in battle and they defeated a bunch of them, and no doubt a bunch died. So we come to chapter 15. That's just the end of what we finished yesterday, finishing up that chapter. And now we come to chapter 15. Things get really serious here. So let's read this chapter. Let's see, it's a pretty long chapter. It's about 41 verses. So we'll get through all of this morning and try to finish this chapter if we can. So follow with me. Verse 1 of chapter 15. So the Lord spake unto Moses, after all this has transpired. It's been an awful chapter. They've done everything they could to provoke God, and now God's promised that none of them is going into the land that are 20 or over except for 2 men. And Moses is not going to get to go in himself later, but that hasn't happened yet. So verse 2, he said, speak to the children of Israel, verse 2, chapter 15, say unto them, when ye be come into the land of your habitations, which I will give you, and you will make an offering by fire unto the Lord. So he's talking about later. When you finally get to the land, you've got to make an offering. This is going to be kind of a make-up offering, a burnt offering or a sacrifice in performing a vow, or a free will offering in your solemn feast, to make a sweet savor unto the Lord, or the herd, or the flock. Then shall he that offereth his offering to the Lord bring a meat offering of 1/10 deal of flour mingled with the 4th part of a hin of oil, and the 4th part of a hin of wine. For the drink offering shalt thou prepare for the burnt offering, or sacrifice with 1 lamb, or for a ram that thou shalt prepare for a meat offering 2/10 deal of meal, flour mingled with a 3rd part of the hin of oil. And for a drink offering thou shalt offer a 3rd part of a hin of wine for the sweet savor to the Lord. And when thou preparest a bullock for a burnt offering, or for a sacrifice in performing a vow, or peace offerings to the Lord, then shall he bring with a bullock of meat offering of 3/10 of flour mingled with a half a hin of oil. And thou shalt bring up for a drink offering half a hin of wine, for an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. Then shall it be done for one bullock and one ram and one lamb or a kid, according to the number that ye shall prepare. Ye shall do to every one to the number. All that are born of the country shall ye do these things after their manner, in an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if a stranger sojourn with you, or whoever be among you in your generations, and will offer an offering made by fire of a sweet savor to the Lord, as you do, so shall he do. One ordinance shall be for both of you of the congregation, and also for the stranger that sojourneth with you. An ordinance forever in your generations, as you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law, one manner shall be for you, and for the stranger sojourneth with you. And the Lord spake unto Moses. So verse 16, we'll stop there a minute. So God has given them instructions when they come into the land. Hey, Miss Rebecca, hope you're doing well. Just praying for your family. Sure, I'm sorry about your dad. I saw his obituary last night and his picture, and big old guy. It looked like you. My wife, first thing she said when she saw your dad's picture, said, Rebecca looks just like him. So that's a compliment. So we're praying for your family. So God has given them instructions now, prophecy 40 years for what's going to happen 40 years later. And all this is kind of redundant, but it's the same thing in the offerings. He's pointing the children to the fact that when they finally do get into Canaan, which they're going to come back to Kadesh Barnea again. See, here's a principle you got to remember. When God brings you to a place of testing, and when you fail that test and you refuse by faith to follow God, God's going to bring you back to that same test again. If you fail the test, you'll take it over. They failed at Kadesh Barnea. But before they enter the promised land, being led by Joshua, guess where they cross from? They go right back to Kadesh Barnea again. It's kind of like 40 years later, deja vu, we're back at Kadesh Barnea, but they make a different decision the next time. And most of us have been to our Kadesh Barneas before, where we challenge God's will, question God. God tells us what we must do, and we don't like it. So many of us have made choices. It's like when God called me to preach, that was my Kadesh Barnea. It was 19, God called me to preach. I was sitting in a conference, and I did not want to preach, and I rebelled for 18 months. I rebelled. My Kadesh Barnea, and guess what God did? God brought me right back to the Kadesh Barnea. And I had to make the same decision 18 months later after God chasing and whipped the britches off of me. I'm just saying, when God wants you to do something and you fail to, by faith, follow him at the Kadesh Barnea in your life, you'll end up going back to Kadesh Barnea again. God will take you back and remind you of what you did. So hopefully this time you'll make a change and do something different that's right. So all this chapter 15 is about what's going to happen when they cross into the promised land 40 years later. So many times we come to the crossroad and we're not sure which way to go, but it's crystal clear to these people which way they should have gone, and they didn't. They faced the choice of entering the land of faith or turning back in the wilderness, and they made the wrong decision and turned in unbelief. However, when they looked at the wilderness, they changed their mind and decided that the promised land with its walled cities and giants was not so bad as the wilderness. They changed their mind when they saw what they'd spend 40 years in. They attempted to go into the land. They was going to pick them a captain to go into the land. But this was not a decision of faith. It was a decision based on their experience of almost 2 years in the wilderness thus far. They presumed to go into the land. Presumption is as dangerous as unbelief. If you presume on God, that's as dangerous as just directly disobeying him and walking in unbelief. So, the wilderness, God says in chapter 15, from chapter 15 to chapter 25, this is called the chapters of faltering, fumbling, fussing in the wilderness. That's all this is. J. Vernon McGee puts 3 F's to it. Faltering, fumbling, and fussing in the wilderness. That's all 15 to 25 is. It's just them fussing and aggravating and complaining and murmuring in the wilderness for 11 chapters, 15 to 25. At Kadesh Barnea, God had turned them back into the wilderness. And so now this is a good outline. Now watch this. Listen to this. Their walking was turned into wandering. They had been walking from Egypt to the promised land, but God turned their walking into wandering. They have no direction. They're not walking to anywhere. They're just wandering in circles in a wilderness. When you miss God and make a decision at a Kadesh Barnea, and you choose to rebel against what God clearly shows you is his will, you'll quit walking and you'll start wandering. Not W-O, but W-A. Just wandering around, going in circles, making no progress, just wandering in circles, but not walking toward, you're not heading no direction. You'll show right back up where you started. So they're walking toward the wandering. Watch this. They're marching, turn to murmuring. They were marching toward Zion. They were marching toward the promised land. They were marching in direct obedience in order, following the standard in front of them, marching behind the ark, which is a type of the presence and the power of God. Moses and Aaron leading the way with the Ark of the Covenant. And they're marching through the wilderness, and they come to Kadesh Barnea. But God turns their marching into murmuring because they refuse to possess their possession. God has already given this land to them hundreds of years before. And they refuse to go in because they go in and see what's there. And instead of seeing the God of the land, they see the people of the land. Instead of seeing the victory of God, they see themselves as the victims of the giants who would eat them like grasshoppers. They got their eyes on man instead of God. Got their eyes on circumstances instead of God's promises. Circumstances will cause you to get your eyes off God. Peter walked out of the boat and got on the water and was walking on the water just like Jesus was, until he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the waves. And as soon as he saw the waves, he began to sink. Now, I've never been in water and began to sink either. I've never walked on water. But I don't believe God just let him totally sink in the water. Just as he was walking on the water, when he looked at the waves, the Bible said he began to sink. I think God was letting him go down the water. Every step he took, he just kept sinking lower. And then finally says, Lord, save me. And Jesus came to him, grabbed him by the hand, and they walked into the boat together. So Peter walked on the water. You can fuss about Peter's lack of faith, but he did something none of us has ever done. He got out of the boat and got in the water and walked on it with Jesus. But his mistake was when he took his eyes off of Jesus. And this is what happened to Israel. They took their eyes off of their Savior that had delivered them out of Egypt and already brought them out of Pharaoh's hand. But they saw the giants and exaggerated the story that every man in Canaan is bigger than statue than we are. And that's not true. And the giants weren't so big that they looked like grasshoppers. That would have been astronomical. The giants would have been 40 feet tall. They weren't that big. 8 or 9, some maybe even 10 feet tall. The Amalekites, Anak, the Anaks, and the Anakis is the UFO guys calling now the Anakis, talking about the giants of Genesis 6. And so all of this is God's turning everything. So they go from walking to wandering. They go from marching to murmuring. Watch this. They go from witnessing is turned to wailing. They've been witnessing the power of God. They saw Pharaoh's army destroyed in the Red Sea. They saw the manna come every day. They saw the water come out of the rock. They saw the pillar of fire cloud by day and the fire by night. They saw God provide quail to cover the camp from one side to the other, a day's journey by a man walking 3 feet deep. They saw everything that God's done, the miracles. They even saw God judge Miriam at the door of the tabernacle and turned her to a leper. They've seen God do all these miracles, but now their witnessing is being turned to wailing because they're crying and weeping, and God's killing people. God's sending enemies against them, and God's sent plagues to destroy the 10 wicked spies. And they're warring. Instead of being a mighty army of 600,000 plus men that are ready to do battle, their warring is turned to wobbling. They're wobbling on their feet. They can't fight. They're being overcome by these 2 nations up in the mountains, the Canaanites and the Amalekites. And then their singing is turned to sighing. They've been singing the songs of Zion, but now their singing is turned to sighing because they're out of God's will. And then their working is turned to wishing. Instead of them working and marching, and as they had built the tabernacle and followed the instructions of God and saw what God has done through his presence in the tabernacle through Moses and Aaron, their working now has ceased and they have turned to wishing. But their wishes are even wrong. Wish we was back in Egypt. Oh, wish we'd have died in the wilderness. Because they know what's coming. God's put a death sentence on everyone in Israel 20 and up. How would you like to be among God's chosen people and hear God speak from the tabernacle to say to an entire nation of chosen people that everyone 20 and under, you're going to die in the wilderness. You're going to wander for 40 years, and none of you that are over 20 are going to ever see the land. You're going to die. And your carcasses are going to fall in the wilderness. Can you imagine living every day wondering, when am I going to die here? Because they had hoped about the land that God had promised Abraham. But because of their unbelief, they're never going to see it. Never, never, never. Never going to see what God promised was a sure thing. And what was the problem for it? 10 spies that came back and turned the heart of the people to unbelief. I'm going to tell you, that's why you have to be very careful. If you don't understand the power of words, what comes out of your mouth is powerful. And if you get in a spirit of unbelief, the people you can impact around you in your church, if you start doubting God, our church is about to go into a building program. We're going to build 20,000 plus square feet onto our buildings. We need more space. And Sunday at 5 o'clock before church, we're having a meeting. Anybody wants to come, they're going to show the plans, and they'll be there to ask questions, answer questions, anything any of us may wonder. So I'm anxious to see the plans. I haven't seen them yet. Anxious to see the plans, how it's going to lay out. He's told us how it's going to be. I'm excited, but I want to see the plans because I love buildings. I love building programs. I love to see a church having to build. And our church is going to have to build 20,000 square feet plus. So I'm excited about that. But all it would take would be one or two when the plans are out to start murmuring and say, well, I just don't think this is too much money. Now's not the time to go into a building program, and, we've got plenty of, we can make do it. That's all that does is that begins to sow discord, and that seed of unbelief will spread like a cancer in a church. And before you know it, you'll have a bunch of folks murmuring, and God will judge a church because of those of unbelief. And you got to be careful. If you don't agree with what God's doing, if you don't agree, you can't follow. I'm not talking about you, man, of God doing stupid stuff and getting totally out of God's will. I'm talking about just because you don't agree. You don't know all the details. You're not the one God called to lead. And if you don't agree, go talk to the pastor instead of telling everybody in church how you feel. Go say, Pastor, I'm a little concerned about this. Can we do this? Is this the way? Is this the way? Yeah, your church is going to get built because of people working together. You've got to trust God. You can't look at the circumstances. You got to look at God. And if there's a need, you think God's not going to meet that need? But what you're supposed to do if you have a problem, don't just either keep your mouth shut or go to the man of God and say, Pastor, I've gone to the pastor and asked questions before. I say, Pastor, I'm not trying to be hard to get along with. I just don't understand you. Kind of give me some clarity here. What we're doing? Hey, Brother Mike. And so go to your pastor and say, I'd like to have some clarity here. Are we financially able to do this? Are we going to have to borrow money? Now, I'm sure they're going to tell us that, but our church don't borrow money. I'm sure we're going to pay for it as we go. We've bought 2 pieces of land since I've been there, and both of them one was $70,000, one was, I think, both of them were in the $70,000 range. We both paid cash for them. We bought a new van, and I think it was $60,000 or $70,000. Bought a new piano, $50,000. Our piano was like 40 or 50 years old. Bought a big grand piano, and we bought new buses, not new, but newer buses for us. Been replacing our buses that are wearing out. We pay cash for everything. Besides all of that, we're giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars in missions. It's no big deal for our church to have a meeting on a Wednesday or Sunday night and just call it for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and the preacher bring up 5 or 6 or 7 projects for missions. Church is building. The church wants to send them $5,000 to help them, $10,000 to help them, $2,000 to help medical bills for a family that's over in such and such nation, or a family that's got to come back because of an emergency physically and they need to get all the tickets bought, so we'll give them $4,000, help them buy tickets for all their family. I mean, we do that all the time as a church. And you ought to see what God does. I saw our offering the other Sunday. On the report was $138,000. That was not even the faith promise. Faith promise was like $30,000. That's not normal. But every time we give away, God gives it back. And so, but all you got to do is just start murmuring, and you'll cause the whole place to be defiled. And that's what happened here. So now they're going into the wilderness. I thought they were. They was going to pick them a captain and go back to Egypt, but God said, no, I'm going to turn you into the wilderness. So now they go. And God's turned everything backward on them. So there's no record from here on out now. There's no record of them anywhere of what happens when they go through these silent years. There's instances throughout these 40 years. We'll read instances in the next 11 chapters. And in Deuteronomy, there'll be instances. But basically, for the most part, these 40 years are silent. God don't record every day what happens. We're given just a few instances with no connected history. There's no history of what happens in these 40 years, except what God prophesied. And in chapter 33, which is about as uninteresting as any chapter in the Bible, we'll find the log of the journeys. It'll tell us where they went and traveled. And you can fit the recorded instance into this log of where it happened. It shows that we're not given a detailed account of these years. These are considered wasted years for the children of Israel. Wasted. 40 years wasted. They accomplished nothing. Nothing is accomplished in 40 years of wandering. These are wasted years. Hey, Miss Dawn. These are wasted years. Why? Because of their unbelief. Unwilling to believe God to possess what God said was theirs. Go figure. So God has now given us this insight. Joshua in chapter 5, we learned that during this time in Joshua, we get to the book of Joshua, we'll learn in chapter 5 of Joshua, during this 40 years, they never circumcised their children. All the children, male children that were born, they didn't circumcise the whole 40 years. Nor, we'll also find out later on in Amos chapter 5 and verse 25, they didn't offer up sacrifices in the wilderness. It says in Amos 5:25, have you offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? The answer is no. They don't do the sacrifices in the wilderness like they're supposed to. That's not recorded during the book of Numbers because it's silent. 40 wasted years. Say you're 19 years old and you hear the message that your grandpa and your daddy and all your family that's older than 20 is going to die in the wilderness, and we're going to wander for 40 years, and basically all you're going to do is just live in a tent, move from time to time, and eat manna, whatever else you can find in water, and you're going to live like that for 40 years. Your clothes are never going to wear out, so you're going to wear the same clothes. Same shoes are not going to wear out. You can wear the same clothes and shoes for 40 years, eat the same manna, drink water for 40 years. You're not going to kill your animals to eat. You're going to eat manna and water and wear the same clothes for 40 years, live in a tent, and watch your older family die. And you're 19 years old when you hear the message. And when you finally get back to Katie's Barnea, you're 59 years old. And you've wasted 40 years of your life wandering in the wilderness because of your daddy and your mama and your grandpa and your grandma because of the decision they chose for you that we can't take the land. And they waste 40 years. And when they finally get to the promised land, they're almost 60 years old. And those that were children are not that old, but they wasted their years. Those young babies lived their teenage years and their young adult years in a wilderness, in a tent, accomplishing, doing nothing. They're not building anything. They're not sacrificing anything. They're not circumcising their children. They're doing nothing but wandering and complaining for 40 years. Now, you say, that's sad, Amy. It is. But can I just make a point here? There's a whole lot of people sitting on a church pew that are doing nothing but marking time, and they're wasting their life. They don't go anywhere. They don't do nothing for God. They don't make any sacrifices for the cause of Christ. They don't witness. They don't give. They don't sing in the choir. They don't teach a Sunday school class. They don't help in VBS. They show up when it's convenient. Anything they don't like, they murmur and complain. They're unfaithful. But they're still a member of the church, and they're spiritually in a wilderness going in circles. And they end up coming to the end of their years, and they look back on their life and somebody says, what have you done for Jesus? It's going to be worth the reward. And they can't think of what. Somebody comes in, evangelist says, how many of you ever led anybody to Jesus? Brother Gary, you know what I'm talking about. You're not a young man anymore. You're like me. You're on up in years and got wisdom. But how many people have you watched through the years of church that sit on a church pew and never did a blessed thing but complain? And a preacher comes in and says, have you ever witnessed anybody a clear gospel witness? And people in revival run to the altar and say, I've gone soul winning with people all over the country, taking people soul winning. And I've had men older than me, women younger than me, in the group that we took would say to me, this is the first time I've ever gone out to tell anybody about Jesus. And they've been saved 20, 30 years. And there's a whole church full of people sitting in our nation that are doing not one blessed thing for the cause of Christ. The preacher and his family have to do it all. They're wearing their health out. They're spending their own money to try to keep the doors open. And are just a few in the church are bearing the burden of the rest that are nothing but a bunch of stragglers, a bunch of moochers, a bunch of squatters that eat off the church, milk the church, mooch off the church, come, enjoy the singing, enjoy the preaching, and sit there and complain about everything they don't like, and never do one thing to help the church move forward. And they end up at the end of their life, they look back and say, have you done anything for God that's worth anything? And they're just like this bunch of Jews that die in the wilderness, 40 years wasted. But it just didn't affect the one that died. Their children had to suffer. Their blessed children that were just young when this message from God that the old folks 20 and up are going to die, those children have got to wander in a spiritual wilderness and live in a tent and eat manna for 40 years and wear the same clothes and shoes for 40 years and accomplish nothing, build nothing, have nothing to show for it but a bunch of graves in the wilderness and a bunch of dead carcasses. Wasted years. Man. So we're not, and I read it yesterday, 1 Corinthians. This is for our example. Every bit of this is for the church because God knew the church was going to be just like Israel. Every church I've ever pastored, less than 25% of the church did all the work and paid all the bills. Yep. You got 100 people in a church. Smaller churches have sometimes a better percentage. But like in our church, 700, 800 people, we had 150 workers for Vacation Bible School, which is good. But you know, that's not the majority of the church. We have 50 or 60 in the choir, but that's not the majority of the church. If I could sing, I'd sing in the choir. I can't sing my voice anymore. I can't sing. I try to sing congregations, but I can't sing loud. I'd sing in the choir if I could. If my voice comes back, like it did there for a while, I'll sing in the choir. I hadn't played the guitar in a while because I couldn't carry my guitar. I couldn't even pick up nothing as heavy as my guitar, so I haven't played the guitar in a while. I can't even stand up with it because it's too much for my back. So I'll get back to that before long. But only just a small percentage. If you got a church of 20 or 30, there's about 5 or 6 that are carrying the load. That's it. Maybe a few more. But what's the rest doing? They're squatters. They're moochers. You say, I ain't got no talent. Listen, God's a liar if what you said is true. God said he's given every man a measure of faith, and he gives gifts to men. Every man has a gift. Every woman has a gift. You may not be able to sing. You may not be a preacher. You may never be a missionary. But God has given you something. It may be a ministry of helps. You just may be good at organizing stuff. You may be good at just taking care of keeping the church clean. You may be good at you could pray. I mean, I did a message at the church a few months ago on how to intercede for the man of God. If you can't do anything else, you can spend time every day praying for your man of God, being an intercessor. You can give out a gospel tract. Everybody can give out a gospel tract. Carry tracts in your car when you go through a line to get you some, to a drive-through to get you something to eat, give a gospel tract. Or when you pull up to a stoplight or a stop sign, there's a guy there with a sign, we'll work for food or help if you can, I'm out of work. Well, give him a couple dollars, or if you got something in your car, you give him and then put a gospel tract. Say, hey man, sorry you're having bad luck, man. I know you're down on your luck, but Jesus loves you, I love you. Here's a gospel tract. Trust God, things can be better if you'll give him a chance. Simple as that. Simple as that. You'd be surprised how you can start up a conversation in Walmart or Lowe's or some other place of business. When I had a boy here helping me work in the yard before I had to surgery. I was trying to get all my yard work done. So we went to Lowe's, and I'd stand there with the cashier, and I'd say something like, boy, it's a beautiful day in it. I'd say, well, you got anything planned for the weekend? I'd say, I can't wait for church. And she'd say, you go to church? I said, yes, ma'am. I said, I love God. I said, I've been preaching 50 years. I said, man, I love my church. And she said, isn't that good? And I'd say, are you a Christian? She said, oh, yeah. She said, I go to such and such church. And start up a conversation, or just talking about your nation. Boy, happy 4th of July, 250 years. Isn't it good God's blessed our nation this long? And what's the response of the people? If the person's a Christian, they'll say, it sure is. God's sure being good to me. If they're not a Christian, they'll look at you kind of funny. I say, yeah. I said, God's the one that did all of this. Are you a Christian? Get a chance to open up that's anybody can do that. But there's people just like these bunch of unbelievers. That murmured. Study it. We're going to go through it the next 11 chapters. From here to chapter 25, we're going to see it. There's nothing recorded about these 40 years except a few instances that's full of nothing but fumbling and faltering and fussing. That's all they do. Fuss about everything. They get to the place where they fuss about water again. And it makes Moses so mad he strikes the rock again, and God judges him because of that. Even Moses misses it. Moses misses Canaan land because of his anger. He struck the rock twice, and the rock's a type of Jesus, capital R in the New Testament and Old Testament. This rock is Jesus. He struck it twice, and Jesus don't get crucified but once. That's a true type. You don't mess with types. That's why the home is so important. That's why marriage is so important. Because marriage is the true type of Jesus Christ and the bride of Christ, the church. And when you break a type, when you mess with the types, true types, and Jesus the rock is a true type, and Moses struck the rock twice, and because he hit the rock the second time, God says, you're not going to Canaan. He told him the second time, he said, don't strike the rock, speak to it. He didn't need to be crucified again. He just needed to be spoken. I don't need to crucify Jesus again on the cross. I just need to speak to him and speak about him. Don't hit him, speak to him. Don't crucify him again. Tell about when he was crucified 2,000 years ago. So let me emphasize this again. The whole theme of this chapter is that you can delay God's blessing, but you cannot destroy God's purpose. That's the whole purpose of this chapter, the whole theme. You can put off God's blessings, but you cannot stop God's purpose. What was God's purpose? To raise up a nation, a seed, a nation, and a land for Abraham and his seed, to bring them into the promised land. That was the purpose of God. The blessing was that God delivered them out of Egypt, brought them what should have been an 11-day journey. Now they've been almost 2 years in the wilderness. They're at Kadesh Barnea, just a little ways from crossing over Jordan. And because of their unbelief, they're going to wander and accomplish nothing for 40 years. And 1.2 million of them is going to die in the wilderness before they come back to the same place again, Kadesh Barnea, with nothing to show for 40 years but a bunch of dead bodies in the wilderness. And they finally possess their possession. God's purpose is fulfilled 40 years late. They didn't stop God's purpose, but they delayed God's blessings. You can disobey God. You can put God off. I did for 18 months. I ran. And it was a wasted 18 months of nothing but chastisement. In that 18 months of running, God struck me down physically. I ended up in the hospital. Had to have emergency appendix surgery. My appendix ruptured as the doctor was taking it out. I was so sick. I got to the doctor, and the doctor rushed me straight to the hospital. When I got there, the doctor that did the surgery was a Christian surgeon. I knew him, a great Christian. They took me straight into surgery. They did not take me into the preparation room. Took me straight from the emergency room to the surgical room, got me prepped in the surgical room. And the doctor came in with his cap and everything on and came over to me and said, we're going to get you ready real quick, so we got to get this out. You're real sick. Are you ready? I said, yes, sir. I said, I've already prayed. He said, well, can you mind if I pray? He took his hat off and held my hand and prayed for me in the surgical room. And within about 3 minutes, they shot me full of something. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a room. And I woke up in recovery. Then I woke up in the room. And I had the old-timey surgery, the big 6-inch incision. I was in the hospital 5 days, out for 6 weeks of work. I'd already signed up to go to Bible college, was accepted in Bible college while I was in the hospital. God paid my first year of school tuition, paid my bills while I was out of work because I was running from God. And then my wife found out I was pregnant with the first child. And while I was in Bible college my first semester, the week of Thanksgiving, my daddy died. We buried my daddy. Then I got sick again. I was leading the singing at a camp meeting. Walked out one night after the service, sat in my vehicle, and when I sat in the vehicle, my back started hurting, my lower back, right at the top of right at the bottom of my spine. And I reached back behind my back to feel what it was, and there was a knot about this big on the tails, right about where the tail end of my spine comes down to your lower back. There was a big knot. I was sick all night, went to the emergency room the next morning, and I had a cyst that was a birth defect from my childhood that had infected, and it had bloated up as big as an orange. They had to do surgery that morning and cut it open, lance it open, clean it out. That was while I was in my first semester of Bible college. I was running from God. I was working with young folks. I was leading the youth choir. I was active in church. I was teaching. I was singing. I was leading the adult choir as assistant choir leader. I was faithful every service. I was doing everything. I was even taking kids out soul winning. But I wasn't preaching, and God called me to preach, and I was running. And finally, in February of that next year, we lost our first child. I wasted 18 months, physical, financial, losing a child, losing my father, twice in the hospital because of my rebellion, and had nothing to show for it but some wasted time because of my rebellion and unbelief. I told God, I will not preach. I'll work with the choir. I'll teach. I'll soul win. I'll be faithful. I'll do anything the preacher wants me to do, but I will not preach. God says, and the last thing he said, before I surrendered on February the 22nd, sitting in Piedmont Bible College in Winston-Salem, in the middle section on the second row on the fourth seat over. Chapel was over. I was there by myself, and I sat there. I don't remember who the preacher was, but I remember he preached on crossing the Jordan River. And he said, when you cross the Red Sea in salvation, God opens up the path and you can see clearly across. God shows you the way to the cross. But he said, when you come to cross the Jordan River, that's a type of crossing over into the land of victory. You got to surrender your will. And God didn't say to the Levites that I'm going to open up the entire Jordan River and you'll see a clear path across. He said, no. But when you step your foot down into the water, every place your foot steps will be dry ground. And as they picked up their foot by faith, the water's still there. When their foot hits the ground, the water's already gone. And God says, you got to step out by faith. Are you going? He said, the last thing you've got that I've not touched is your wife. And she had a real problem when she lost her child. I mean, I thought I was going to lose her. Even when she got pregnant with our first child that we still have now, our oldest child, she had a real problem. And I thought, Lord, please. And God said, are you going to serve me? I said, God, I'm doing it. He said, no, are you going to preach? And I was sitting there that morning, February 22nd. I said, Lord, here's what I'll do. I'll give the man, but you'll have to give the preacher because I can't do it. That's what I said. I'll give the man. And when I did, I started weeping. I was in the auditorium by myself. All the kids back in class. I didn't go to any classes the rest of the day. I got in my car and come home. I cried all the way 56 miles from the college home. When I got out of my car, my wife met me at the door of our little mobile home. She saw me smiling. I was crying. And the first thing out of her mouth was, you got it settled today, didn't you? Because for 18 months, she'd say something like, do you think maybe God's dealing with you about something? I'd tell her to shut up and leave me alone. You don't know what you're talking about. She knew God was dealing with me. But when I walked in the door, she had such a walk with God. She said, you got it settled, didn't you? And we hugged and embraced and prayed. And that was over 50 years ago when God backed me in a corner and I surrendered. That was my second Kadesh Barnea. The first one, I did what Israel did. That was on a Thursday. I called my preacher on Friday. I said, preacher, I surrendered to preach yesterday at Piedmont Bible College. God called me and I finally surrendered. He said, praise God. He said, I want you to preach, not this Sunday, but next Sunday, which is a week away. I want you to preach Sunday morning. I said, oh my soul. We run 700 or 800. I was sick all week. But before this happened, that same Friday when I called my preacher, I had a preacher who's a cousin of mine, my first cousin. He was pastoring a church up in Ashburn, North Carolina. He called me Friday evening because he knew I was working with the youth choir and I'm working with the youth. He called me. He said, we're having a youth night Sunday night. And he said, could you possibly come and bring some kids and sing and maybe you talk to our kids for a little bit Sunday night? We're having a youth night. I said, how did you know? He said, no, what? I said, I just rented a preach yesterday. He said, praise God. He said, I want you to come speak. He said, I want you to come preach. So I surrendered to preach on Thursday. I preached my first message on Sunday night in Ashburn, North Carolina, and Bethel Baptist Church. I can remember the message I preached. The next Sunday, I preached my first message in my home church. I didn't sleep all week. Preaching in my home church scared me to death. I couldn't get nothing from God. Here it is Saturday. I ain't got a message yet. I went to sleep on the couch trying to find God's mind for a message. I didn't know how to get a message. And I drunk Maalox and Pepto-Bismol, sick as a dog. And finally, by 2 o'clock Sunday morning, God woke me up and gave me a message. I've got it hanging on my wall right there. You don't believe it? I'll show you right here. There's the message hanging on the wall. Let's see. There it is right there. That's the message hanging on the wall. You know what the message is? In times like these, the ABCs of what we need in times like these. You know what my message was? A, in times like these, we need an anchor, Hebrews chapter 6. B, in times like these, we need a Bible. Thank God we have a Bible. C, in times like these, we need convictions. I'd sung that song. In times like these, you need a Savior. In times like these, you need an anchor. Be very sure, your anchor holds and grips the solid rock. That's the message I preach. The ABCs of what you need in times like these: an anchor, a Bible, and convictions. And I've been preaching almost every week since then. But I had to come to my Kadesh Barnea, where I give up my will for God's will. And there's a lot of people sitting in church this morning, or this week. They'll be sitting in church Sunday morning. They have done nothing but wasted years. It's about time you say yes and cross over Jordan. Leave your Kadesh Barnea behind. Leave the wilderness behind. You say, I don't know what God wants me to do. Why don't you ask him? Why don't you just do what I did? God, I'll give the man. Why don't you just find you an altar somewhere in your house, behind the barn, or at the church, and just lay yourself on the altar and say, God, I don't know what I can do for you. I don't think I've got nothing to offer. But God, all I can offer, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. That's all you got to do, is just present yourself. God, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know what I can do. But God, today I'm yielding myself. I want to cross over Jordan. I'm tired of the wilderness. I want to leave my Kadesh Barnea behind. I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. Father, bless these today that are watching by way of internet. Thank you for the Word of God, how it applies to our life. Even the Old Testament saints are a picture for us. Now, Lord, give us a good day today. Be with each one that's watching. Keep us safe. Have your will in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today. I'm telling you, I did not get where I wanted to go, but we got somewhere, buddy. I'm telling you. Oh, my soul, Lord, help me. I'm telling you what, it was good today. I felt the presence of God. So we stopped in verse 16 of chapter 15. We'll pick up in verse 17 tomorrow. Chapter 15, we'll finish up chapter 15. So let the words of God sink in your heart today. When God leads me in this direction, I know he's speaking to folks. I told you it was about to get good. I told you this thing was about to get deep. We've gone from teaching, we've gone into preaching now. So I know we're on target. I just hope you'll obey God. Well, I love you guys. Thank you so much for being my friend, giving me time, your time this morning to spend with me on Facebook. Hope you all have a good day. Be safe. And Lord willing, in the morning, 9 o'clock, we'll see you back on Preacher's Podcast.